Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of our interview show, in which we interview each other about franchises that one of us is very knowledgeable about and the other person is not. I'm joined today by Eilert.
Hey guys, I'm gonna interview Alexander today
Hello.
about the about the Kingdom Hearts franchise, which is a series I admittedly do not know a lot about, and I always found it a bit odd, Alexander. From face value, it seems a bit of an unlikely amalgamation of different brands to me, and as it has never seen a proper release on PC. I was never able to really play it, but I do know of its like PlayStation 2 heyday, and the kind of rippling effect it has on the on like the niche audience it has gathered. So I'm really interested in exploring that aspect with you today, and I hope you are too.
I am too, because, over the past couple of months, I've been on some gaming podcasts here and there. I've been on, frequent various gaming forums. I feel like I very rarely get an opportunity to really kind of get deep into my thoughts on Kingdom Hearts. So I'm really looking forward to kind of laying my soul out here.
All right, awesome. So with that, the first question is, how did you get into the series?
So this is a really interesting story, actually. The year was, I believe it was 2008. If it wasn't 2008, it was 2009. Now, at the time, the PlayStation 3 was out, but I was very much a Nintendo fan, and I had no real intention of getting a PlayStation through myself, especially at, like $600, $500. It had definitely dropped from $600 at that point, but it was still quite expensive. And as somebody who had no affinity to the brand, I had no interest in it. However, my cousin, who is somebody who throughout his life had given me a lot of older video games that he no longer had any interest in, had an old PlayStation 2 unit, and he was like, hey, I don't really have much of a use for this anymore. Do you want to take it? I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I took the PlayStation 2 unit. I took a small collection of games that he had with it, which included things like Grand Theft Auto, Vice City, and San Andreas. And I had a decent amount of fun with them. But eventually I was kind of like, I kind of want to see what else this console has to offer. And so I walked into my local EB Games, which it should be noted. Here in Canada, they're called EB Games, but in the United States, they're GameStops. But previously, they were EB Games. It's this weird kind of like naming thing where Canada retained the old name, but it's technically the same store.
Okay.
Anyways, the point is, I walked into the store. This is like I said, it's 2008, early 2009, so there are still PlayStation 2 games being sold on store shelves because it hasn't been too long since, Sony launched the PlayStation 2's successor. Mm-hmm. And I happened to see a copy of Kingdom Hearts 1 still shrink wrapped for the PlayStation 2. And I remember thinking I feel like I've definitely heard of this series before. I've seen iconography of the series. I know that it involves like Disney stuff, but it's a bit of a JRPG. Should I do some more research on it? Should I? You know what? I'm not going to do any more research on it. This just looks like an interesting game, and I'm going to pick it up. And I did that. And to be fair, it was only like $20 at that point, so it wasn't like an especially expensive bet. But in retrospect, it was a really kind of fascinating way for me to get into that series, because I feel like nowadays, with the kind of proliferation of opinions on the internet and the ease of access of being able to get onto the internet, it's so rare that you walk into a store, be it a digital storefront or a kind of brick and mortar store, and you go, oh, I'm going to pick up this game without doing any research on it. You always do some research, but in that case, I just was like, you know what, I'm going to follow my heart, which is something that they do in the Kingdom Hearts series a lot, and I'm going to just pick up this game without doing any research. And I brought it home, and I got really into it. And basically from there, I slowly but surely started playing all of the other games in the series. And with like a minor exception or two, I've basically can claim to have experienced pretty much everything the series has to offer at this point.
I see. I see. Okay, cool. Um, so, as a person like me, who hasn't really played any Kingdom Hearts franchise, I've only really become familiar to it through advertising and kind of brand awareness. How would you describe Kingdom Hearts to someone who hasn't played any Kingdom Hearts game?
I mean, it is a action JRPG starring a variety of anime characters that mix with Disney characters, with occasional cameos by Final Fantasy characters. And one thing I want to stress there is the part about the Final Fantasy characters being cameos. A lot of people like to describe the series as it's Final Fantasy meets Disney, and while obviously traces of Final Fantasy's DNA are all over the package, it really needs to be stressed that the Final Fantasy actual like character portion of the game is not at the forefront of it in the way that the Disney characters are. This is very much more, I would say, Disney, but obviously, like I said, it is a JRPG as well.
All right.
And the thing that really needs to be stressed is, you said that, hey, I always have been kind of mystified by this series because it's really weird. And oh man, it gets really weird. The first Kingdom Hearts game, I'm not gonna go into like a super big breakdown of the entire series plot because we would be here forever. But the first game in the series, the one that's just called Kingdom Hearts, is a perfectly approachable, incredibly easy to understand story that you could easily condense into like an hour and a half film theoretically if they wanted to. All of the other games that follow it just get increasingly and increasingly more crazy.
I see.
And yeah.
So that was actually going to be my next question. Would you say the series is more approachable to a Western audience or to an Eastern audience?
That's a hard question to ask because, to be honest, I've not, in all my experience, playing the Kingdom Hearts games, I can't admit to have read a whole ton of kind of Japanese impressions of the series. I have, seen a lot of Western impressions of the series, and clearly a lot of Western gamers, enjoy it very much and, are not turned off by the very kind of Japanese-esque qualities that the series possesses.
Okay,
I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think that it's pretty universally appealing. I don't feel like it's like more appealing to Japanese gamers or more appealing to Western gamers. I think that it kind of has a place for everyone. And I think that in part that's due to the fact that the combat system at its core is simple enough that like even kind of very young people or people that maybe are not like into what you think of when you think of Japanese action RPGs like Platinum Games efforts or From Software's efforts with the Dark Souls series produce. Like it is very much on the opposite end of the spectrum of those kinds of games, and I think that definitely contributes to its worldwide accessibility.
All right. So, despite its kind of like child-centric branding, you would kind of say that Kingdom Hearts is approachable to players of any age in that regard. Yes.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think that there are definitely some moments in the series I can think about that definitely require you to be a little bit kind of finicky and a little bit very kind of precise. There's a lot of like twitchy muscle movements in some certain segments, but otherwise, yeah, I'd say that it's pretty approachable to most everyone. I'm not saying that it will hook everybody, for the record, but it definitely is approachable to everybody.
Okay, cool. And so, in what kind of way would you say Kingdom Hearts stands out from the catalog of games that Square Enix has previously produced and developed?
I mean, I guess like on a broad scale, the Kingdom Hearts series is definitely not as dour as I think some of the Final Fantasy games can get. Obviously, because it's made heavily in collaboration with Disney, there's not going to be a lot of like blood or gore or very kind of dark motifs right off the bat. But even if Disney wasn't kind of breathing down on their neck, making sure that they kind of towed a certain line with those games in terms of their tone. I don't think that it would really make sense for this series to be any kind of darker than it is. It's very much a series about friends coming together and kind of overcoming evil through the power of friendship, and it gets a lot more kind of complicated than that, but it does not kind of really kind of delve into some of the sadness and despair and kind of tragedy that I know that Square Enix's other properties tend to go into. The other thing that's interesting about the Kingdom Hearts series is that it's there was definitely a kind of period of time where it felt like Final Fantasy had really lost its way. Following kind of the release of 12, which itself was divisive with certain groups of people, Final Fantasy 13 and the initial launch of Final Fantasy 14 really seemed like it was sort of the death knell for that franchise. And then, things picked up. Final Fantasy 15 earned a decent amount of goodwill, and it seems right now that Final Fantasy, the remake of Final Fantasy 7 is really going to kind of bring the series back in full force. In contrast, the Kingdom Hearts series, I don't really feel ever really had a point in which it dropped off or it felt like it was in serious trouble. There have definitely been games in the series like Dream Drop Distance where fans as a whole are not super keen on them. But even those games were kind of like generally well received. And yeah, I'd say that's like kind of another significant part about the Kingdom Hearts series that really sets it apart from some of Square Enix's other big franchises, is that I never really feel like it ever had a point in which it dropped off. It's always been kind of consistently healthy.
All right. So from what I understand, as you kind of explain about the franchise, it sounds like Square kind of took the Final Fantasy series and added Disney characters to it, and thought that mix would kind of make for a good game. What do you know specifically of the franchise's history and the kind of marriage between Square Enix and Disney in this regard?
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of lore about how a lot of contradicting stories about how exactly the series came to be. My understanding is that basically Square Enix and Disney were sharing kind of an office at one point, and Tetsuya Nomura, who's sort of like the kind of big head honcho director of the series, so happened to catch wind about a possibility of the two companies collaborating on something. Tetsuya Nomura previously had done character designs on Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII, and had been meaning to kind of branch out and kind of do something of his own that he could put his own stamp on. Because up until that point, Hironobu Sakaguchi was sort of like the main face of Square Enix in a lot of its biggest games. And basically, he kind of wanted to, Tetsuya Nomura kind of wanted to make the kind of Square Enix version of Super Mario 64. And he thought, well, if I don't have access to Mario, what's a character that is just as popular as Mario that I can put front and center of this game? And he's like, well, Mickey Mouse is. And so that was sort of one of the things that kind of helped kicked off the collaboration. Eventually, over time, what happened is, as more of the JRPG Final Fantasy-ness of Tetsuya Nomura and his companions' design kind of made its way into the series, Mickey Mouse was swapped out for Sora, who's the human hero of the series, and a lot more. The game became a lot more than just Square Enix's Super Mario 64. But that's sort of the basic, super abridged explanation of how the series kind of came to be.
No, that's interesting. You always have these Disney and other big companies like that always put their mascots in these very generic tie-in games, but you always have these oddities like Epic Mickey, for example, and
right.
I feel like Kingdom Hearts fits that category as well, in which they pick their characters and truly do something unique with them. So that's always really interesting to me to see that kind of thing happening. So yeah, when you compare Kingdom Hearts, the first and the last game, what would you say has changed the most between the two, and how do you think the franchise has evolved over its lifespan?
Ooh, I would say that like in terms of basically the basic mechanics, because I already talked a little bit about the story and how it gets linear. In the original Kingdom Hearts, like obviously your movements are very kind of exaggerated. You're leaping in the air. You're slashing enemies with your Keyblade, which is like your Sora's signature weapon. But at the same time, I feel like your movements feel kind of relatively grounded. Whereas by the time that you reach Kingdom Hearts 3, Sora's like wall jumping and he's performing all these like kind of very crazy, very like anime-esque superpowers. And not that anyone really kind of comments on it. They're like, oh yeah, that's just kind of normal. So that's definitely one major way in which the series has changed mechanically, is that it definitely has become a lot more kind of exaggerated and I would say almost superhero-ific in terms of the way that the characters move and explore their worlds. As I stated earlier, the stories get a lot more complicated, a lot more lore heavy. Definitely require a PhD in the series to kind of fully grasp. So that's a kind of another really kind of huge change too. And yeah,
you
go ahead.
wouldn't necessarily like recommend when a new player wants to get into the franchise, they would have to like start at the PlayStation 2 or the remakes of the PlayStation 2 games in order to fully get to where the series is right now.
So if you're asking me like how it is that you recommend that people get into the series, the good thing about the Kingdom Hearts series is that Square Enix has done a decent job. I know they have not made them available on PC, and I'm sorry about that, but they have done a good job of making it so that if you're somebody who owns a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 3, you can get your hands on them relatively easily, thanks to the various compilations and collections that they've released on those consoles. And I would say just like start out with the kind of original Kingdom Hearts and see how things go from there. Because if you jump in too late into the series, it's just gonna be kind of confusing and off-putting. So kind of start at its most basic form and see if that appeals to you, and then kind of go from there.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you've played a lot of Kingdom Hearts games, almost all of them. Out of all these games, what would you consider your favorite, and what other games kind of stick out as memorable to you, even though they're not necessarily your favorite entry in the franchise or whatever?
I would say, and in the previous episode of this series that we did, you were kind of like, I know that I'm going to probably make some people raise some eyebrows here, but my favorite Command and Conquer game in the, I believe it was the Tiberian branch, was something Alliances. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna say something potentially controversial, which is that I'd say that probably my favorite game in the series to this day remains Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, and specifically the Game Boy Advance version of the game. So to just take a step back. Kingdom Hearts is released in 2002, and then Kingdom Hearts 2 is released in 2005. In between those games, they released Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories on the Game Boy Advance in 2004. And it basically functions as an interquel between the two games, explaining a couple of things that to people that have not played it can seem confusing at the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 2. The thing about Chain of Memories, and the reason why it kind of turned a lot of people off and is not a lot of people's favorites, is because it's basically a card-based RPG, which a lot of like people in the kind of JRPG space hear, oh, it's a card-based game, and they kind of groan and walk out of the room. I understand people's frustrations with those series of words. I personally always felt that the way that Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories utilized its card-based system was always, I felt really clever. I like the way that it basically both made it so that you have to be mindful of the physical space in which you're kind of like on the battlefield as well, while also managing your deck of cards and basically making proper use of the cards at the same time. And how it manages to do all that on the kind of Game Boy Advance's relatively little limited inputs, because you just have a D-pad, an A button, a B button, and your LR triggers. I think that I would also not recommend it as a first game in the series, but I would recommend anyone who plays the original Kingdom Hearts to really give it a go, and if they can, to play it on the original Game Boy Advance version of the game, because it received a remake for the PlayStation 2, which eventually got ported over to the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. However, I felt like the remake, while perfectly serviceable, didn't fully kind of capture the original spirit of the original Game Boy Advance game. I felt like it made the thing is that whenever you go into a battle in Chain of Memories, you're locked into a arena, and in the original Chain of Memories, the arenas are relatively small, which force you to kind of like make decisions quickly and kind of feel like you're constantly under pressure to do things. Whereas in the kind of PlayStation 2 remake of the game, the arenas are a lot bigger, which makes it easier for you to kind of stall things out and not be as decisive as you'd out to be. And more than that, I just find the kind of sprite work on the original Game Boy Advance version of the game I find is really beautiful, whereas in the PlayStation 2 release of the game I find it to be really, it's serviceable. Again, it's serviceable, it's fine, but it's just kind of generic. So I would say, yeah, check out Chain of Memories. And to be honest, as far as like other games in the series go that I really like that aren't my favorite, I kind of feel like I have something... like there's something about every single other game in the series that I find that I can really appreciate about. So I'm not gonna kind of delve super deep into the series beyond that.
All right, fair enough. Looking back on the series as a whole, as we kind of bring this podcast to a close, is there one aspect about Kingdom Hearts and that you really like, and is there one aspect that you thought could have been done better by the developers when looking back at it?
One aspect that I really like, I would say that like the thing that I really enjoy about the series is, up until now I've stated, how the story gets really convoluted and gets hard to follow after the first game, but if you do manage to follow along and you pay attention to the various kind of clues and little teases that are kind of sprinkled throughout every game in the series, there is a logic to kind of the madness of Tetsuya Nomura. There is an actual, it's loosely defined, and you can tell that it's partially hobbled on the go, but there is a kind of logic and structure to everything that he's making. And when you discover, like, oh shit, this thing in that game was actually teasing this thing, which is unveiled in this new game, it's really cool. There's a really cool, and I'm going to go straight up, I'm going to go a little bit into spoilers here, but you discover late into the series that basically the main villain's ambition is to kind of like impart part of his soul onto his various disciples, and in doing so effectively create clones of himself. And basically when he creates a clone of himself by imparting his soul on another person, that person's eye basically changes color. And the thing is that a couple of games before it was unveiled in this game, you basically discover you're introduced to one of his disciples, and his disciple is seen at one point in the game with his eye being one color, and then his eye changes color later on, signifying that basically he had part of his soul imparted onto him. And kind of going back through the series and realizing, holy shit, they were actually teasing this thing all along. Like, that was a really kind of like profoundly cool moment for me. in terms of something that it could have done better, though, I just feel like at the end of the day, though, as cool as those moments are where you realize, oh wow, there is a method to this madness, there are definitely elements of the series where it just feels like it's being convoluted for the sake of being convoluted, and they could have, cleaned it up a fair bit. It is also a thing where, like, a lot of the so the thing about the Kingdom Hearts series is that it employs a lot of voice actors that originally voiced their corresponding characters in their original cartoons or movies that they appeared in, like, the original voice actors for, Mickey and Donald and Goofy and whatnot and so forth. And their voice acting is generally great. When it comes to the non-Disney characters, the Final Fantasy characters, or the original characters that are created for the series, the voice acting can be a little bit more hit or miss. And it is always a little bit cringeworthy to listen to cutscenes and be like, Donald sounds really good here in his, unique Donald Duck kind of way, but then Sora here, that's not quite as good as it could be.
I see. Okay, I've always had that feeling with Japanese games that at some points, like, the story just gets lost in itself and how convoluted it can be. I've recently played through Ace Combat 7, and while I love the game, I definitely feel that, the lore is so out there and so zany, and I have that same feeling with, like, a lot of Japanese games. So when all's said and done, though, what kind of legacy do you think Kingdom Hearts will leave behind on, the games within its category, maybe even Final Fantasy and, like, Square's library as a whole?
I mean, I think that one of the big things that Kingdom Hearts will leave behind, that few other games will really kind of, few other games will claim to have done, is managing to kind of continue a single kind of this narrative thread that the series has been spinning for as long as it has been doing it. Sorry if that was a little bit confusing the way I phrased that, but, like, the series has been going on since 2002, and it had its most recent entry in 2019, Kingdom Hearts 3, and it's going to continue going for quite some time. And there are, like, very few series that I can think of that have been going on for as long as that and have, like, had a single consistent narrative that is kind of progressed through all those games. You have games where, the narrative, is maybe, there's a, like, general broad narrative that continues, that is consistent throughout each and every entry. But in the Kingdom Hearts series, Kingdom Hearts 1 follows sort of Sora's path to kind of save the world of Disney from darkness, and that story is still continuing up in Kingdom Hearts 3, and is gonna likely continue in Kingdom Hearts 4, if/when that game comes out.
I see. Okay, well, I feel like I have a much more clear idea on what Kingdom Hearts really is beyond the one viral video about Kingdom Hearts that stars two guys who both play Sora and Roxas, and they duke it out against each other in front of, like, a shopping mall. I don't know if you know this video, but it's a really fun video, and I visit it yearly. But yeah, I do feel like you've broadened my horizons when it comes to Kingdom Hearts. I'm still waiting for that PC release, though, before I get really into it. But I feel this conversation has definitely been helpful for me.
Yeah, we'll see about that PC release. I don't know. It's stranger things have happened.
Yeah, well, who knows these days? I feel like Square's, like, PC support has really been on point the last couple of years. So.
Yeah. By the way, I believe Sora is portrayed by Haley Joel Osment, who previously, you might remember from his appearance in The Sixth Sense, the M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Oh, I see. Is he still playing, like, the even in the latest game? Is he still playing the same character?
As I understand it, yeah.
Oh wow, that's dedication.
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, this has been another episode of the GVMERS franchise interview series. Next time, keeping in with the pattern of the first episode of this series, I'd imagine that I'm probably going to be interviewing Eilert about another franchise that he is very familiar with. So look forward to that. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you want to support us, you can do so by watching our videos on this channel or on our primary channel at youtube.com/gamers, GVMERS. You can follow myself on Twitter at Alex Kozina. You can follow Eilert on Twitter at the Eilert, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
That is correct. And you can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/gamers. Also correct?
Also correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't like, I don't know, _gamers or the gamers or...
No, it's all uniform, yeah.
All right. Well, until next time, this is Alexander Kazina signing off.
See you guys later.